Who do you think you are? You are too little to intimidate me. I wasn't trying to intimidate you.
She called her a black pig in front of everyone on that plane. But 30 minutes later, that same girl was on her knees, sobbing, begging for forgiveness. This is what happened between those two moments. Flight 447 to Geneva. An international youth robotics competition. A turbulence disaster that would destroy dreams and equipment alike. And two 14-year-old girls whose lives would collide in the most unexpected way, forging a bond from the ashes of hate and humiliation. This is a story about what happens when privilege crashes into reality at 30,000 feet. Elma Richardson sat in seat 32B, window seat, economy class. 14 years old, traveling alone for the first time in her life, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from fear of flying. From excitement. From disbelief that she was actually here, on this plane, heading to the Geneva Youth Robotics Summit. Elma was a black girl from Detroit who'd taught herself robotics from YouTube videos and library books. While other kids her age were scrolling through social media, Elma was in her grandmother's garage, soldering circuits and programming microcontrollers on a laptop held together with duct tape and hope. She'd lost her parents in a car accident when she was 7 years old. That kind of loss changes you. Makes you grow up faster than you should. But her grandmother Eunice had fought for her. Fought the system that said she was too old, too poor, didn't have the resources to raise a child. Eunice took Elma in anyway, loved her anyway, believed in her anyway. And Elma had spent every day since trying to make her grandmother proud. The robotics competition had been Eunice's idea. She'd seen Elma's talent, seen the way her granddaughter could look at broken electronics and see possibilities where others saw trash. So when the scholarship competition was announced, Eunice had pushed Elma to enter. Elma had won. Top score in all categories at the Detroit Regional Competition. Her project was a solar-powered water filtration robot designed for communities without access to clean drinking water. Something that could actually change lives. Something that mattered. The robot itself was in the cargo hold right now, carefully packed and wrapped. In Elma's lap was a worn backpack covered in circuit diagrams she'd drawn herself, filled with her presentation materials and backup blueprints. She kept touching the backpack, making sure it was still there, still real. She was nervous. Terrified actually. Because she knew what she was walking into. The Geneva Summit wasn't for kids like her. It was for private school students with university lab access and parents who could afford the best equipment money could buy. She'd be competing against kids who'd never had to choose between buying resistors and buying dinner. But she belonged there. She'd earned her spot. And she was ready to prove it. Meanwhile, in business class, Shennels Vandermeer was living a completely different reality. Shennels was also 14, also heading to Geneva, also brilliant in her own right. But that's where the similarities ended. Shennels came from Connecticut wealth. Third-generation legacy student at the prestigious Ashworth Academy. Her father, Gabriel Vandermeer, was a tech CEO whose name appeared in Forbes regularly. Her mother, Cindy, was a socialite who treated her daughter's achievements like collectibles to display at dinner parties. Shennels sat in business class with her robotics coach, Mr. Hudson, and her teammate Kenzie. She had a glass of sparkling water in one hand and her expensive design tablet in the other. Her project was an advanced AI-assisted surgical robot, built with resources most high schoolers could only dream of. University laboratory access. Professional consultants. Equipment that cost more than some people's cars. She'd already won 2 national competitions. The Geneva Summit was supposed to be her guaranteed ticket to MIT early admission. Her parents had made that very clear. The pressure was crushing. But Shennels had learned to wear it like armor. Confidence bordering on arrogance. The unshakable belief that she was naturally superior, just like her mother always told her. That success was her birthright. She'd worked hard, yes. She was genuinely talented. But she'd never known struggle. Never known what it meant to want something and not be able to afford it. Never known what it felt like to be underestimated before you even opened your mouth. That was about to change. An hour into the flight, Elma needed to use the bathroom. She unbuckled her seatbelt and made her way down the aisle, backpack tucked under her arm because she didn't trust leaving it at her seat. The bathroom near economy had a long line, so she walked a bit further toward the business class section. She stood there waiting, looking down at her notebook, reviewing her presentation notes one more time. At the exact same moment, Shennels emerged from the business class bathroom. She was checking her phone, not paying attention, and nearly walked right into Elma. They made eye contact. Shennels noticed Elma's backpack immediately. The circuit diagrams. The robotic sketches visible on the worn fabric. Her eyes narrowed. Wait, Shennels said, her voice sharp with surprise. Are you going to the Geneva summit? Elma looked up, cautious. She'd learned to read tone, and this girl's tone wasn't friendly. Yes, I am, Elma said quietly. Shennels actually laughed. A cruel, disbelieving sound that made several passengers turn their heads. You? Shennels said, looking Elma up and down. Taking in her discount store clothes, her worn sneakers, her nervous posture. What did you do, win some charity diversity lottery? The words hit Elma like a slap. But she didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. She'd survived worse. I won the Detroit regional competition, Elma said, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. Top score in all categories. Sure you did, Shennels said, her voice dripping with condescension. Let me guess, they needed to fill a quota. Girls like you don't belong at competitions like this. You're going to embarrass yourself. Other passengers were starting to stare now. The bathroom line had gone quiet. Kenzie, Shennels' teammate, appeared behind her. Shennels, come on, Kenzie said, uncomfortable. Let's just go back to our seats. But Shennels was on a roll now, feeling threatened in a way she couldn't quite name. This girl, this nobody from Detroit, was going to the same competition. Was going to be on the same stage. And something about that made Shennels feel small. What are you even building? Shennels demanded. A robot that does your homework for you? Elma took a breath. Her hands were shaking, but her voice didn't waver. A water filtration system for communities that don't have access to clean drinking water, she said clearly. Something that actually helps people. And that's when Shennels felt it. That uncomfortable twist in her stomach. Because this girl wasn't just some quota fill. She was building something meaningful. Something that mattered in a way Shennels' surgical robot, impressive as it was, somehow didn't. That feeling, that threat to her superiority, made Shennels cruel. She smiled, cold and sharp. How noble, Shennels said, her voice loud enough for everyone in the section to hear. The little black pig trying to save the world. The entire cabin section went silent. Not the quiet of people minding their business. The shocked, horrified silence of people who couldn't believe what they just heard. Elma's eyes filled with tears instantly. But she didn't look away. Didn't drop her gaze. She stood there, tears on her cheeks, and looked Shennels right in the eye. Because Elma Richardson had been raised by a woman who'd survived Jim Crow Alabama. Who'd taught her that dignity wasn't something someone could take from you. It was something you chose to keep no matter what they called you. Flight attendant Troy appeared, his face serious. Is there a problem here? He asked. Elma's voice cracked, but it was controlled. Steady despite the tears. No, she said. No problem. I'm going back to my seat. She walked past Shennels, head high, backpack clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face but her spine straight. Every person in that section watched her walk. And every single one of them knew what they just witnessed. Shennels stood there, Kenzie staring at her in shock. Troy looked at Shennels with barely concealed disgust. Miss, Troy said coldly, I'm going to need you to return to your seat as well. Shennels walked back to business class, her hands shaking now too. But not from nerves. From adrenaline. From the first small flutter of uncertainty. Mr. Hudson finally looked up from his phone. What's going on? He asked. Kenzie just stared at Shennels. Ask Shennels, she said quietly. Back in economy, Elma slid into her seat, trying to control her breathing. Trying not to sob out loud. The elderly woman next to her, Mrs. TJ, gently offered a tissue. I heard what she said, honey, Mrs. TJ said softly. You held yourself with dignity. Elma took the tissue, wiped her eyes. I just want to prove I belong there, she whispered. Mrs. TJ put a warm hand on Elma's shoulder. You already belong, she said firmly. Don't let anyone tell you different. If you're watching this and you believe that kindness and talent matter more than privilege and cruelty, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this story is about to take a turn you won't see coming. And let me ask you something. What would you have done in Elma's position? Would you have kept your composure, or would you have responded differently? Let me know in the comments below. Because in 30 minutes, everything was about to change. The plane was about to hit turbulence that would destroy Shennels' entire future. And the girl she just called the worst thing she could think of would have a choice to make. A choice between revenge and grace. Between walking away and reaching out. A choice that would change both of their lives forever. Back in business class, Shennels settled into her leather seat, trying to look unbothered. Trying to pretend like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just said the most vile thing she could think of to a complete stranger. But Kenzie wouldn't even look at her. Her teammate, her friend since 6th grade, sat in the seat across the aisle with her headphones on, staring deliberately out the window. The silent treatment. The kind that spoke louder than any lecture ever could. Mr. Hudson had his nose buried in his tablet, reviewing competition schedules, oblivious to everything that had just transpired. Or maybe he'd heard and simply didn't care. Either way, Shennels was alone with her thoughts. And those thoughts were loud. She kept seeing Elma's face. Those eyes filling with tears but never looking away. That quiet dignity in the way she'd walked back to her seat, head high despite the humiliation. The way every single person in that section had looked at Shennels afterward. Not with admiration. With disgust. Shennels told herself she didn't care. Told herself the girl had been in her space, in her way, threatening her position. Told herself that someone needed to put her in her place. But her hands were shaking. She clasped them together in her lap, willing them to stop. Willing the uncomfortable feeling in her stomach to go away. That twisting sensation that felt uncomfortably like shame. Because the truth was, Shennels had been raised for this exact moment. Raised to believe that people like her were simply better. That it was the natural order of things. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, as clear as if Cindy Vandermeer was sitting right next to her. It had been a dinner last week. The whole family gathered around their imported Italian marble dining table. Her father at the head, her mother to his right, Shennels across from them both. The help had just cleared the salad course. These competitions are full of mediocre students now, her mother had said, swirling her wine glass. Diversity initiatives, scholarships for the underprivileged. They're diluting the talent pool. But you, Shennels, you're naturally superior. You come from a long line of excellence. Remember that. Her father had nodded, not even looking up from his phone where he was checking stock prices. Vandermeers don't associate with lessers, Gabriel had said, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. You maintain your standards. You maintain the family reputation. That's what separates us from everyone else. Shennels had absorbed those words like gospel. Because why wouldn't she? These were her parents. Successful, wealthy, respected. They'd built an empire. They knew how the world worked. She'd been taught this her whole life. In subtle ways and obvious ones. In the way her mother pulled her away from certain children at the country club. In the way her father spoke about his employees. In the private school curriculum that centered her ancestors and erased everyone else's. In the dinner party conversations where people who looked like Elma were discussed like problems to be solved, not people to be respected. But now, sitting in that business class seat with Kenzie's silent judgment pressing against her and the memory of Elma's tears burned into her brain, something felt wrong. Shennels pulled out her phone, desperate for distraction. A text from her mother was waiting. Win this competition. MIT is watching. Don't disappoint us. No good luck. No, we love you. Just pressure. Just expectation. Just the constant reminder that her worth was tied to her performance, her victories, her ability to maintain the family legacy. Shennels stared at the text until her vision blurred. She told herself again that Elma deserved it. That she was protecting her position. That someone needed to remind that girl where she came from and where she didn't belong. But her hands kept shaking. And somewhere deep down, in a place she didn't want to examine too closely, Shennels knew the truth. She'd said that horrible thing not because Elma deserved it, but because Shennels was scared. Scared that this girl from Detroit with her worn backpack and homemade diagrams might actually be better than her. Scared that without the safety net of her parents' money and connections, Shennels might be nothing special at all. The thought terrified her more than she wanted to admit. She shoved her phone back in her pocket and closed her eyes, trying to sleep. Trying to forget. Trying to silence the voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like her own conscience, asking her what kind of person she'd become. An hour passed. Then another. The flight continued smoothly, humming along at 35,000 feet. Then the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're approaching an area of rough weather. I'm going to ask everyone to return to their seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for turbulence. It was a routine announcement. The kind passengers heard all the time. Nothing to worry about. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Flight attendants moved through the cabin quickly, efficiently, checking that everyone was buckled in, that tray tables were up, that overhead bins were secure. Troy passed Shennels' row, giving her a look that held zero warmth. Seatbelt, miss, was all he said. Shennels was already buckled. She gripped the armrests, annoyed at the delay. She had work to do, presentation notes to review. The plane started to shake. Gently at first. Just a little bump here and there. Normal turbulence. Then it got worse. The shaking intensified. The plane started to buck and sway like a ship in rough seas. Overhead bins rattled. Passengers gasped, a few nervous laughs scattered through the cabin. In economy, Elma had been staring out the window, trying to distract herself from the lingering humiliation. Mrs. TJ had fallen asleep next to her, gentle snores barely audible over the engine noise. When the turbulence started, Elma's stomach dropped. She'd never been on a plane before this trip. Didn't know what was normal and what wasn't. The shaking got violent. Suddenly the plane dropped. Not a little bump. An actual drop, like the floor had disappeared beneath them. Passengers screamed. Bags flew from overhead bins that hadn't been properly secured. A laptop went skittering down the aisle. The oxygen masks deployed with a loud whooshing sound, yellow cups dropping from the ceiling panels, swinging wildly as the plane continued to buck and shake. People were screaming now. Really screaming. The kind of primal fear sounds that come from humans who suddenly remember they're just fragile bodies in a metal tube miles above the ground. In the cockpit, alarms were blaring. The cargo hold sensor had triggered, flashing red on the instrument panel. The plane dropped again. Harder this time. Someone's phone flew through the air, hit the ceiling, shattered. The lights flickered, emergency lighting kicking in with an eerie red glow. 5 minutes. 5 minutes of absolute terror. Elma grabbed Mrs. TJ's hand, squeezing so hard her knuckles went white. The elderly woman was awake now, eyes wide but remarkably calm. She squeezed back, her other hand gripping the armrest. The plane shook so violently that Elma's teeth rattled. She couldn't think, couldn't breathe, could only hold on and pray that her grandmother wouldn't have to bury another family member. In business class, Shennels was equally terrified. All her privilege, all her money, all her carefully constructed superiority meant nothing at 30,000 feet in a plane that felt like it was tearing itself apart. She was crying. Mascara running down her face, hands white-knuckled on the armrests, mouth open in a scream she couldn't even hear over the roar of wind and engines and other passengers' panic. Kenzie was praying in Spanish, words tumbling out rapid fire. Mr. Hudson had his eyes squeezed shut, lips moving silently. The robot. The thought flashed through Shennels' mind even through the terror. Her robot was in the cargo hold. If they were experiencing this much turbulence up here, what was happening down there? But then the plane dropped again and all thoughts disappeared except the desperate animal need to survive. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The plane leveled out. The shaking subsided to a gentle vibration. The roaring wind quieted. The emergency lights stayed on, but the violent bucking was over. The cabin was filled with the sounds of crying, of heavy breathing, of people comforting each other and checking that everyone was okay. The captain's voice came over the intercom, shaky but trying to sound calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for that rough patch. We've cleared the weather system and we're through the worst of it now. You can see the seatbelt sign is still on. Please remain seated while we assess the situation." Pause. Then, however, we have received an alert that some cargo has shifted during the turbulence. Our crew is currently assessing the extent of the damage. We'll provide updates as we have them. Again, please remain seated. Shennels' heart, which had just started to slow down from the turbulence, immediately began racing again. Cargo had shifted. Her robot was in the cargo hold. 20 agonizing minutes passed. The longest 20 minutes of Shennels' life. She sat frozen in her seat, staring straight ahead, her mind running through every possible scenario. Minor damage. Major damage. Complete destruction. Would be fine. Had to be fine. The robot was packed in a reinforced case. Industrial foam padding. Her father had spared no expense on the shipping container. Would be fine. Had to be fine. Then Troy's voice came over the cabin speaker system, professional but strained. "If you have checked robotics equipment in the cargo hold for the Geneva Youth Robotics Summit, please press your call button. We need to speak with you regarding the cargo situation." Shennels' face went completely white. All the color drained from her skin so fast that Kenzie actually leaned forward, concerned despite her anger. "Shennels?" Kenzie said quietly. But Shennels was already unbuckling, already standing, her legs shaky beneath her. She pressed the call button frantically, repeatedly, like it would make Troy appear faster. He came down the aisle, his face carefully neutral but his eyes sympathetic. "Miss Vandermeer?" he said quietly. "What happened?" Shennels demanded, her voice too loud, too sharp. "My robot. What happened to my robot? If you could please come with me to the galley area, I can explain the situation," Troy said. "Tell me now," Shennels said. "Just tell me now." Troy glanced around at the other passengers watching. He lowered his voice. The cargo netting in the competition equipment section failed during the turbulence, he said. Several of the robotics projects shifted and collided with each other. There has been damage. I can't tell you the extent until we land, but I wanted to prepare you. Shennels felt the world tilt. Not from turbulence this time. From pure, overwhelming panic. No, she whispered. No, no, no. We'll do everything we can, Troy continued. When we land in Geneva, you'll have immediate access to assess the damage and file any necessary insurance claims. The competition is in 2 days, so there may be time to... 2 days. Shennels' voice was rising now, cracking. The competition is in 2 days and you're telling me my robot might be destroyed? She was hyperventilating. Actually hyperventilating. Her chest was tight, her vision was narrowing, her hands were numb. Miss Vandermeer, I need you to breathe, Troy said, his professional demeanor slipping into genuine concern. Please sit down, put your head between your knees. But Shennels couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only see her entire future crumbling. That robot is my entire future, she gasped out. MIT scouts are going to be at this competition. This was my shot. Took me 6 months to build. 6 months. I understand this is upsetting, Troy said. But right now I need you to calm down and breathe. Mr. Hudson was there now, having finally put down his tablet. He guided Shennels back to her seat, pushed her head down toward her knees, rubbed her back while she gasped for air. It's going to be okay, he said, though his voice held no conviction. We'll figure something out. Insurance will cover it. We can rebuild next year. Next year. The words echoed in Shennels' mind like a death sentence. Next year, when this year's MIT admissions would be closed. Next year, when her parents would look at her with disappointment instead of pride. Next year, when everyone would know she'd failed. She forced herself to breathe. In through her nose, out through her mouth. Over and over until the spots in her vision faded and her hands stopped tingling. She sat up slowly, her face blotchy and red. I need to know, she said to Troy, who was still standing nearby. I need to know how bad it is. As soon as we land, you'll be the first to see, he promised. The rest of the flight was agony. Shennels sat rigid in her seat, staring straight ahead, her mind spiraling through every possible disaster scenario. She pulled out her phone, stared at her mother's text again. Win this competition. MIT is watching. Don't disappoint us. How was she supposed to win without a robot? How was she supposed to impress MIT scouts with nothing to present? For the first time in her entire privileged life, Shennels Vandermeer was facing a problem that money couldn't immediately solve. A crisis that her parents' connections couldn't fix with a phone call. A failure that no amount of legacy status could erase. She thought about the robot. 6 months of work. Countless hours in the university lab. The advanced AI programming she'd been so proud of. The precision surgical arm that could perform microsurgery with accuracy no human hand could match. All of it potentially destroyed. And the worst part, the part that made her stomach turn with sick irony, was knowing that somewhere in economy class, Elma Richardson's robot was probably fine. Because Elma's simple, cheap, homemade water filtration system wasn't complex enough to be catastrophically damaged. Wasn't expensive enough to be devastating to lose. The girl Shennels had mocked, had called the most horrible thing she could think of, was probably going to be fine. While Shennels was falling apart. Karma, some might call it. Divine justice. The universe correcting itself. But sitting there in business class, feeling her entire future slip through her fingers, Shennels just felt terrified. The plane began its descent into Geneva. The Alps appeared in the windows, beautiful and indifferent to the human drama unfolding inside the aircraft. Shennels closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, being a Vandermeer wasn't going to save her. And she had absolutely no idea how to handle that. What would you do if everything you'd worked for, everything you'd built your future around, was suddenly destroyed? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you want to see how this story unfolds, hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next will change everything for both of these girls. The plane touched down in Geneva with a gentle thud that felt almost anticlimactic after the terror they'd experienced in the air. The Alps stretched across the horizon, snow-capped and magnificent, gleaming in the afternoon sun. It should have been a moment of excitement, of arrival, of dreams about to come true. But for several students on that flight, it was about to become a nightmare. The moment the seatbelt sign dinged off, chaos erupted. Students with robotics equipment were on their feet immediately, ignoring the flight attendant's requests to wait for orderly deplaning. They needed to see. Needed to know. Shennels was among the first out of her seat, pushing past other passengers with a desperation that would have embarrassed her under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. Her entire future was in a cargo hold that had just experienced catastrophic turbulence. Mr. Hudson and Kenzie followed her, though Kenzie kept her distance, still processing what had happened earlier on the flight. Airport staff directed all students with competition robotics to a special cargo assessment area, separate from the main baggage claim. It was a large, sterile space with harsh fluorescent lighting and concrete floors. Cold. Industrial. The kind of place where dreams went to die. There were maybe 20 students there, all from different countries, all heading to the same competition. All wearing the same expression of dread. Airport personnel and competition officials were already bringing out the equipment, case by case, project by project. Elma Richardson stood with Mrs. TJ near the entrance, her heart pounding. She'd spent 6 months building that robot. 6 months of late nights in her grandmother's garage, of skipped meals to afford components, of YouTube tutorials watched until her eyes burned. If it was destroyed, she had no backup. No insurance. No wealthy parents to file claims and rebuild. This was it. Her one shot. An official called her name. Elma Richardson, Detroit Regional winner, Solar Filtration Project? Yes, Elma said, her voice small. They brought out her case. It looked intact from the outside, which was a good sign. But she wouldn't know for sure until she opened it. She knelt down, hands shaking, and popped the latches. The robot was there. Still in one piece. Relief flooded through her so powerfully she almost started crying. But wait. She carefully lifted it out, examining every component. One of the solar panels had a crack running through it. Not completely shattered, but damaged. The filtration mechanism seemed okay, the circuitry looked intact, the frame was solid. Fixable. This was absolutely fixable. Minor damage, the official noted on his clipboard. Reparable. You'll have access to the workshop facilities at the competition venue. Elma nodded, carefully placing her robot back in its case. Her hands were still shaking, but now from relief instead of fear. She looked up, and that's when she saw Shennels across the cargo area. They were bringing out a case that looked like it had been through a war zone. The reinforced shipping container her father had paid premium prices for was dented. One corner completely caved in. The latches were broken. Foam padding was spilling out from cracks in the plastic. This was bad. This was very, very bad. The officials set it down in front of Shennels with sympathetic expressions. They knew before she even opened it. Shennels stood frozen, staring at the case like it was a bomb about to explode. Miss Vandermeer, one of the officials said gently, you'll need to assess the damage for the insurance report. With shaking hands, Shennels knelt down. She pried open the broken latches, lifted the lid. And her world ended. The AI-assisted surgical robot that had taken her 6 months to build, that had won 2 national competitions, that was supposed to be her ticket to MIT, was completely destroyed. The main processor was shattered. Actually shattered. Circuit boards cracked in half, components scattered like confetti. The precision surgical arm mechanism was bent at an angle that would have been almost comical if it wasn't so devastating. Motors ripped from their housing. Wires torn. The AI core that her father had paid university researchers to help program was damaged beyond any hope of recovery. It wasn't just broken. It was obliterated. Shennels made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Her knees gave out and she dropped to the floor, right there on the cold concrete, surrounded by the wreckage of her future. She started sobbing. Not pretty, delicate tears. Actual body-shaking sobs. The kind that come from somewhere deep and broken. Mascara ran down her face in black streaks. Her carefully styled hair fell forward, hiding her face as her shoulders heaved. Around her, other students were checking their own equipment. Some had minor damage like Elma. A few had no damage at all. One student's robot was moderately damaged but salvageable. And then there was Shennels, kneeling in the debris of her destroyed project, falling apart in front of everyone. Mr. Hudson crouched beside her, put a hand on her shoulder. Shennels, he said quietly, I know this is devastating. But we can file insurance claims. We can rebuild. We'll try again next year. Next year. There was that phrase again. Shennels looked up at him, her face blotchy and red, eyes swollen. My parents will kill me, she choked out. MIT scouts are here. At this competition. This was my shot. This was my one shot. There will be other competitions, Mr. Hudson tried. But they both knew that wasn't true. Not really. This was the Geneva Youth Robotics Summit. The most prestigious competition for high school students in the world. The one that top universities sent scouts to. The one that could make or break your entire academic future. And Shennels had nothing to present. She looked around at the other students. Some were taking photos of their robots, excited to get started on minor repairs. Others were chatting with officials about workshop access. All of them had something to work with. All of them still had hope. Shennels was the only one sitting in complete wreckage. The humiliation was crushing. More crushing than the loss of the robot itself. Because Shennels Vandermeer had never failed at anything in her entire life. Had never been the person people looked at with pity. Had never been the one at the bottom. And now, surrounded by her peers, many of whom had probably heard about her family name and expected great things, she was nothing. Just a crying girl with a pile of broken electronics. She sat there on the floor next to the wreckage, pulling her knees to her chest, mascara-stained face hidden in her arms, completely and utterly broken. Across the cargo area, Elma had been carefully packing her robot back into its case when she noticed the commotion. Noticed the officials clustered around one particular student. Noticed the destroyed robot. She stood up slowly, trying to see better. And that's when she recognized who it was. Mrs. TJ noticed too. The elderly woman's eyes narrowed and she leaned close to Elma. "That's the girl who said those awful things to you, isn't it?" Mrs. TJ said quietly. Elma nodded, unable to look away from the scene unfolding across the room. Mrs. TJ made a small sound of satisfaction. "Karma works fast sometimes," she said. And Elma should have agreed. Should have felt vindicated. Should have felt like justice had been served in the most poetic way possible. The girl who'd mocked her, who'd called her that horrible slur, who'd tried to make her feel small and worthless, was now experiencing her own version of devastation. Elma should have felt satisfaction. But she didn't. She looked at her own robot, safely packed, damage minimal and fixable. Then she looked back at Shennels, sobbing on the floor surrounded by wreckage. And something twisted in her chest. Part of her wanted to walk away. Wanted to let Shennels sit in the ruins of her privilege and learn what it felt like to lose everything. Wanted her to understand what it meant to have the rug pulled out from under you, to watch your dreams scatter like broken components across a concrete floor. Part of her wanted revenge. Wanted to walk over there and remind Shennels of what she'd called her. Wanted to say something cruel and cutting and devastating. Wanted to make her feel as small as she'd made Elma feel. Would have been so easy. So justified. No one would have blamed her. But then she heard her grandmother's voice. As clear as if Eunice Richardson was standing right there beside her. "Baby girl, compassion isn't weakness. It's the hardest kind of strength. When someone shows you who they are in their worst moment, you show them who you are in yours." Her grandmother had told her that the day of her parents' funeral. When 7-year-old Elma had been so angry at the drunk driver who'd killed them, so full of rage and grief that she'd wanted to hurt someone the way she'd been hurt. Eunice had knelt down, had taken Elma's small face in her weathered hands, and had spoken those words with absolute conviction. "You get to choose who you are, baby girl. Not because of what happens to you, but because of how you respond to what happens to you. That's where your power lives. In your choices." Elma watched Shennels cry. Watched her completely fall apart. And she saw something she hadn't expected to see. She didn't see the bully who'd called her a slur. She didn't see the privileged private school girl who'd thought she was better than everyone else. She saw a 14-year-old girl who was terrified and broken and alone. She saw herself at 7 years old, standing in a funeral home, looking at 2 closed caskets, her whole world destroyed and not knowing how she was going to survive it. She saw a human being in pain. Mrs. TJ was watching Elma carefully. "What are you thinking?" the elderly woman asked. Elma took a deep breath. "Something probably really stupid," she said quietly. Mrs. TJ's lips quirked into a small smile. "The best things usually are, honey," she said. Elma carefully closed her robot case, latched it, and stood up. Her legs felt shaky. Her heart was pounding. Every logical part of her brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea. That Shennels didn't deserve her help. That walking away was the smart choice, the safe choice, the justified choice. But Elma Richardson had never chosen the safe path. She'd chosen the right path. And her grandmother had raised her to know the difference. She walked across the cargo area, weaving between other students and officials, her eyes locked on the girl sobbing on the floor. Several people noticed her approaching. A few whispered to each other, probably wondering who she was and why she was heading toward the Vandermeer girl. Elma stopped a few feet away from Shennels. Shennels didn't notice at first, too lost in her own devastation. Then Elma's shadow fell across the wreckage and Shennels slowly looked up. Their eyes met. Recognition flashed across Shennels' face immediately. Then shame. Deep, horrible shame that made her face flush even redder, made her want to look away but she couldn't. She expected mockery. Expected cruelty. Expected Elma to say something cutting about karma or justice or getting what you deserve. Instead, there was just silence. Shennels' voice, when she finally spoke, was barely audible. "Are you here to laugh?" she whispered. "No," Elma said simply. More silence. Shennels couldn't hold eye contact. She looked down at the destroyed robot, at the physical manifestation of her failure. "I saw your design earlier," Elma said, her voice steady. "On the plane when you were looking at your tablet. The AI surgical assistant, right?" Shennels looked up again, confused now. Why was she talking about the robot? "Why do you care?" Shennels asked, her voice cracking. Elma didn't answer immediately. She looked at the wreckage, assessing the damage with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to salvage and rebuild out of necessity. "We have 48 hours until presentations," Elma said. "I can help you rebuild it. Not all of it. The AI core is beyond saving. But the mechanical components, the surgical arm mechanism, the basic functionality. I can help you salvage enough to present something." Shennels stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. Like the words were reaching her ears but her brain couldn't process their meaning. "What?" she whispered. "I can help you rebuild your robot," Elma repeated, slower this time. "Enough to compete." Shennels' mind was reeling. This didn't make sense. None of this made sense. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "After what I said to you. After what I called you. After how I treated you." And there it was. The question hanging between them like smoke. The elephant in the room finally acknowledged. Elma's jaw tightened slightly. Her hands, calm at her sides, flexed once. When she spoke, her voice was strong and clear and unwavering. "Not because you deserve it," she said, and the words landed like stones. "You don't. But because it's the right thing to do." She took a step closer and Shennels instinctively tried to shrink back, but there was nowhere to go. "And because I want you to see exactly who you called a black pig," Elma continued, her voice harder now. "You're going to watch me work. You're going to watch me rebuild your robot with skills I taught myself from free YouTube videos. You're going to learn what real innovation looks like when it comes from talent and determination instead of your parents' money and university lab access." Shennels was crying again, but these were different tears. Not tears of devastation. Tears of shame. Of recognition. Of something that felt uncomfortably like hope mixed with guilt. "Maybe," Elma said, her voice softening just slightly, "if you pay attention you'll understand why what you said was so wrong. Maybe you'll see that the person you tried to make feel worthless is the same person saving your future right now." The silence that followed was heavy. Charged. Several other students had noticed the interaction and were watching, though they couldn't hear what was being said. Shennels couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. This moment felt impossible. Felt like something from a dream or a story, not real life. No one had ever shown her this kind of grace. This kind of unearned, undeserved compassion. In her world, you got what you paid for, what you earned, what your status entitled you to. Nothing was given freely. But this girl she tried to humiliate and hurt, was offering her a lifeline. Not because Shennels deserved it, but because Elma was choosing to be better than Shennels had been. "I don't." Shennels started, then stopped. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes or no," Elma said simply. "Because I have my own robot to fix too. I don't have time to stand here all day." The practical nature of the statement almost made Shennels laugh, if she'd been capable of laughing in that moment. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, voice breaking, "Yes. Please. I don't deserve this. I know I don't deserve this. But yes." Elma nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Then get up," she said. "We have work to do." Shennels looked down at herself, still sitting on the concrete floor, surrounded by the wreckage of her robot and her pride and her carefully constructed superiority. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara even worse. Took a shaky breath. And stood up. Her legs were unsteady. She felt like she'd been hit by a truck. But she stood. Elma was already assessing the wreckage, kneeling down to examine specific components. "The arm mechanism is bent but not broken," she said, her voice shifting into a clinical, analytical tone. "We can straighten it, recalibrate the motors. The main processor is destroyed, but if you have backup code we can use a different processor. Less powerful but functional. The AI core is gone, but you can do a manual demonstration instead of autonomous. You'll have to code new control sequences." She looked up at Shennels. "Can you code?" Shennels nodded numbly. "Yes, I can code." "Good," Elma said. "Because I can rebuild the hardware but the software is on you. I'll teach you what you need to know, but you're going to do the actual work. Understand? Yes, Shennels said. We'll need to get to the competition venue, Elma continued, standing up and brushing concrete dust from her jeans. They have workshop facilities. Tools, components, soldering stations. We'll work through the night if we have to. Mr. Hudson had been standing a few feet away, watching this entire exchange with an expression of complete bewilderment. Elma, he said carefully, that's incredibly generous of you. Are you sure about this? Elma looked at him, then back at Shennels. I'm sure, she said. Mrs. TJ had approached as well, her expression unreadable. This is your choice? She asked Elma quietly. It is, Elma confirmed. Mrs. TJ nodded slowly, then smiled. Your grandmother raised you right, child, she said. Eunice would be proud. Elma's eyes stung at the mention of her grandmother, but she blinked the tears away. Competition officials were starting to clear the cargo area, directing students to transportation that would take them to their hotels and the competition venue. Elma gathered her robot case. Shennels stood there, still looking shell-shocked, trying to process what had just happened. Come on, Elma said not unkindly. Grab whatever components you can salvage. We don't have time to waste. And just like that, the most unlikely partnership in Geneva Youth Robotics Summit history was formed. The girl who'd been called the worst thing imaginable. And the girl who'd said it. Working together. Building something from broken pieces. Not because it made sense, but because sometimes, the hardest thing to do is also the most human thing to do. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in striking back. It's in reaching out. Have you ever helped someone who hurt you? Have you ever been shown grace when you didn't deserve it? Drop your story in the comments. And if you want to see how these two girls transform each other over the next 48 hours, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next is going to restore your faith in humanity. The competition venue was a massive modern building in the heart of Geneva, all glass and steel and cutting-edge architecture. During the day, it would be filled with hundreds of students, judges, spectators, and media. But at 11 o'clock at night, it was nearly empty. Just security guards making their rounds and a handful of students who'd gotten special access to the workshop facilities. Elma and Shennels were among them. The workshop was a robotics enthusiast's dream. Rows of workbenches equipped with every tool imaginable. Soldering stations, 3D printers, laser cutters, component drawers organized by type and size. Computer terminals loaded with programming software. Testing equipment. It was the kind of space that Elma had only seen in YouTube videos, the kind of facility that kids at well-funded schools took for granted. For Elma, walking into that room felt like stepping into Disneyland. For Shennels, it felt like a last-chance courtroom where her entire future would be decided. They claimed 2 adjacent workbenches near the back of the room, away from the few other students working on their own repairs. Elma carefully unpacked her robot, laid out her tools with precise organization, and got to work. Shennels stood off to the side, unsure what to do with herself. Unsure if she should speak or stay silent. Unsure of everything really, because nothing about the last 12 hours made any sense. Elma worked in focused silence for several minutes, examining the cracked solar panel under a magnifying lamp, testing connections with a multimeter, making notes in a worn notebook that was held together with rubber bands. You can sit down, Elma said without looking up. This is going to take a while. Shennels pulled up a stool, sat down, and watched. And what she saw was mastery. Elma's hands moved with absolute confidence. No hesitation. No wasted motion. She desoldered the damaged solar panel, extracted it carefully, set it aside. Pulled out a small case of salvaged components from her backpack and selected what she needed. I only brought 1 spare panel, Elma said, more to herself than to Shennels. But that's okay. I designed the system to be adaptable. She pulled up a laptop that looked like it had seen better days, the casing cracked, keys worn smooth from use. Opened a programming interface and started typing code. Shennels watched the screen, trying to follow along. The code was elegant, efficient, commented thoroughly. Not the kind of code you wrote when you had consultants doing the heavy lifting. This was code written by someone who understood every single line, every function, every variable. What are you doing? Shennels asked quietly, afraid to break Elma's concentration. Recalibrating the energy distribution system, Elma said, her fingers never stopping their typing. Solar panels are expensive. Really expensive. When I was building this, I could only afford 1 panel. I needed 2 for optimal performance. She paused, ran a diagnostic, nodded at the results. So I learned how to make 1 panel do the work of 2, she continued. You recalibrate how the energy is distributed, optimize the storage in the battery, minimize waste in the conversion process. It's not as efficient as having two panels, but it works. I learned the technique from a YouTube video posted by an engineer in India who was building solar systems for rural villages. Shennels was quiet for a moment. I never had to learn from YouTube, she said finally, her voice small. We just bought whatever we needed. Best equipment, newest technology. If something didn't work, we bought something better. Elma glanced at her, then back at her work. Then you missed the best part, she said simply. What do you mean? Figuring it out yourself, Elma said. The satisfaction of solving a problem with limited resources. The creativity that comes from constraints. Anyone can build something amazing if they have unlimited money. The real challenge is building something amazing when you have nothing. She installed the new panel, tested the connections, ran another diagnostic. That's where innovation actually happens, Elma continued, her voice warming to the subject. Not in fancy university labs with million-dollar budgets. In garages and basements and kitchens. When people who need solutions can't afford to buy them, so they build them instead. The solar panel diagnostic came back green. Elma smiled, a small, satisfied expression. That's one down, she said. For the next 2 hours, Shennels watched Elma work through every damaged component of her robot. Watched her test, repair, recalibrate, reprogram. Watched her solve problems with an efficiency that came from years of practice, from countless projects built and rebuilt and improved. Elma explained everything as she worked. Not talking down to Shennels, not showing off. Just sharing knowledge the way someone does when they genuinely love what they're doing. This filtration membrane was the hardest part to source, Elma said, carefully cleaning a component. The good ones cost $200. I couldn't afford that. So I found a scientific paper about DIY filtration using layered carbon and ceramic. Took me 3 weeks to get it right, but it works just as well as the expensive version. How did you learn all this? Shennels asked. You're 14. I'm 14. I've had professional instructors and university resources, and I couldn't do half of what you're doing. Elma paused, considered the question. I had time and necessity, she said. When my parents died, I needed something to focus on. Something that made sense when nothing else did. My grandmother couldn't afford therapy or counseling, but she could afford a library card. She gestured to her robot with a small smile. So I read everything I could find about electronics, programming, robotics, engineering. Then I started building. Broke a lot of things at first. Learned from every mistake. YouTube became my teacher. Online forums became my classmates. The garage became my lab. That must have been lonely, Shennels said softly. Sometimes, Elma admitted. But it was also freedom. No one telling me I couldn't do something because I was too young, or didn't have the right equipment, or didn't go to the right school. Just me and the work. At midnight exactly, Elma's robot was fully repaired and tested. She ran it through a complete demonstration cycle. The solar panel charged the battery, the filtration system activated, contaminated water went in one end and clean water came out the other. Perfect. Okay, Elma said, carefully packing her robot away in its case. Your turn. They moved to the workbench where the wreckage of Shennels' robot was spread out like an autopsy. Under the harsh workshop lights, it looked even worse than it had in the cargo area. Elma circled the table slowly, examining each broken piece with a critical eye. The AI core is completely destroyed, she said, picking up the shattered circuit board. That's your entire autonomous system, right? Shennels nodded miserably. 6 months of programming. Machine learning algorithms. Neural networks. All gone. The AI programming is beyond saving, Elma confirmed, setting the destroyed core aside. But we can rebuild the mechanical components. The surgical arm mechanism is bent, but the motors are intact. We can straighten the frame, recalibrate the servos, reprogram the control system. She looked at Shennels directly. You'll have to do a manual demonstration instead of autonomous operation. Which means you'll need to code new control sequences. Real-time input, responsive movement, precision calibration. Can you code that? Shennels hesitated. This was the moment to be honest. I can try, she said, her voice uncertain. I'm not as good at coding as the AI stuff. My dad usually hires consultants from the university for the difficult programming parts. I mostly do the design and concept work. She expected judgment. Expected Elma to change her mind about helping, to realize that Shennels wasn't actually as talented as her competition wins suggested. But Elma just nodded, like this was exactly what she'd expected to hear. Okay, she said simply. I'll walk you through it. But you're going to do the actual work. Every line of code, every connection, every calibration. Not me. Understand? Yes, Shennels said. Good, Elma said. Then let's get started. We've got a lot of ground to cover. And so they worked. Elma started with the physical damage, showing Shennels how to carefully straighten the bent arm mechanism using a vise and measured pressure. How to test each joint for range of motion. How to identify which motors needed replacement and which could be salvaged. Gentle pressure, Elma instructed as Shennels worked the vise. You're not trying to force it. You're persuading it back into shape. Feel the resistance. Listen for stress points. Shennels had never worked with her hands like this. Had never had to feel and listen and sense what the materials were telling her. She designed on computers, watched technicians build her designs, tested the finished products. But this hands-on problem-solving was completely new. And surprisingly, frustratingly, she wasn't very good at it. She applied too much pressure and nearly cracked a joint. Stripped a screw by using the wrong size screwdriver. Dropped a tiny component that took them 10 minutes to find on the floor. But Elma was patient. Endlessly patient. She corrected without condescending. Showed without taking over. Let Shennels make mistakes and learn from them. Hours passed. Midnight became 1 a.m. 1 became 2. The workshop grew quieter as other students finished their repairs and left. Eventually, Elma and Shennels were alone except for a security guard who checked on them periodically. They took a break around 2 in the morning, both of them exhausted, eyes burning from close work and bright lights. Elma had brought a backpack full of granola bars and a water bottle. Shennels had nothing, having left the airport in such a state of shock that she'd forgotten about basic needs like food. Elma offered her a granola bar without comment. They sat at the workbench eating in silence, too tired to talk. But then Shennels spoke. My parents don't actually care about robotics, she said quietly, staring at the half-eaten granola bar in her hands. They care about prestige. The MIT acceptance they can brag about at dinner parties. The headlines they can frame. Vandermeer legacy continues or whatever. Elma listened, didn't interrupt. My mom literally told me that winning competitions is about maintaining our social standing, Shennels continued, her voice bitter. My dad measures success in terms of return on investment. The lab access, the equipment, the coaches, it's all calculated. They expect results that justify the expense. That sounds exhausting, Elma said. It is, Shennels admitted. She was quiet for a moment. Why do you care about it? The robotics, I mean. Elma thought about the question, really thought about it. I used to love building things when I was little, Shennels added before Elma could answer. Just for the fun of it. Legos, model kits, taking apart old electronics to see how they worked. But then my parents got involved. Entered me in my first competition when I was 9. I won and suddenly it became this thing. This expectation. I haven't built something just for fun in years. That's sad, Elma said simply. Yeah, Shennels agreed. It is. Elma finished her granola bar, took a sip of water. I care about robotics because it lets me solve real problems, she said. My water filtration robot? I designed it thinking about my grandmother's stories. About communities that still don't have access to clean water. About kids getting sick from drinking contaminated water because they don't have any other choice. She gestured to the partially rebuilt surgical robot. Your robot, when it's working, it could help people too, she said. Surgical assistance that makes procedures more precise, reduces human error, saves lives. That matters. That's worth caring about. She looked at Shennels directly. If you're just building to win, to impress your parents, to get into a good school, you're going to burn out, Elma said. But if you're building because you love it, because you want to make something that matters, that'll sustain you through anything. Then build for that, Elma said firmly. Build because you love it. Build because it matters to you, not to them. That's the only reason that actually counts. Shennels felt something crack open in her chest. Some wall she'd built up over years of parental pressure and social expectations. And through that crack, something that felt like hope started seeping in. I think I'd forgotten that, she said softly. That I used to love this. Then remember, Elma said. Start remembering right now. They got back to work. Elma taught Shennels how to write control code from scratch. Not the high-level AI programming that consultants had handled, but the fundamental, bare-metal code that actually made motors move and sensors respond. You need to understand what's happening at every level, Elma explained as Shennels typed, following her instructions. When you tell the servo to rotate 30 degrees, what's actually happening? Voltage changes, magnetic fields shifting, mechanical movement. If you don't understand the foundation, you can't troubleshoot when something goes wrong. 4 a.m. arrived. Then 5. The sky outside the workshop windows started to lighten, deep black fading to dark blue. They were both running on fumes now. Elma's explanations were getting slower, Shennels' fingers kept hitting the wrong keys. But they pushed through. Because they were so close. The arm mechanism was rebuilt and calibrated. The motors responded correctly. The control code was functional. Not elegant, not optimized, but working. At 6 in the morning, just as the sun broke over the Alps and golden light started streaming through the windows, they ran the first complete test. Shennels typed commands into the control interface. The surgical arm activated, motors humming to life. It reached forward, grasped a test object with the precision gripper, lifted it, rotated it, set it down exactly where commanded. Not autonomous. Not AI-assisted. But functional. Responsive. Working. Shennels stared at the robot, tears streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of devastation like in the cargo area. These were tears of accomplishment. Of pride. Of something she'd actually built with her own hands, her own code, her own understanding. It works, she whispered. Oh my God, it actually works. Of course it works, Elma said, but she was smiling. You built it. We built it, Shennels corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. No, Elma said firmly. I taught you. But you did the work. That's your code. Your calibration. Your robot. The robot wasn't pretty. The frame had visible stress marks from being bent and straightened. The components were mismatched, some new, some salvaged. Wires were visible that should have been hidden. It looked like exactly what it was. Something rebuilt from wreckage in a desperate all-night session. But it worked. And that was what mattered. They sat on the floor, backs against the wall, too exhausted to stand anymore. The workshop was empty except for them, silent except for the hum of equipment and the distant sound of the city waking up outside. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Just sat there, side by side, processing everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Then Shennels took a shaky breath. I need to say something, she said, her voice trembling. Elma turned to look at her. Okay, she said. Shennels was already crying, tears forming before she even started speaking. Her hands were shaking. Her voice kept breaking. But she forced herself to say the words she should have said hours ago. What I said on the plane, she began and had to stop, had to breathe, had to force herself to continue. There's no excuse for it. None. I was taught certain things by my parents. I was raised in an environment that reinforced certain beliefs. But I can't blame them for my choices. I can't hide behind my upbringing. The tears were streaming now, but she didn't wipe them away. I chose to say it, she continued, her voice getting stronger through the emotion. I chose to be cruel. I looked at you and I made a conscious decision to hurt you in the worst way I could think of. That was me. That was my choice. She turned to face Elma fully, forcing herself to maintain eye contact even though shame was burning through her. I called you that horrible thing because I was scared, she said, the words coming faster now, like a confession that had been building pressure for hours. Scared that you were better than me. Scared that all my advantages, all my resources, all my expensive equipment and professional help, didn't actually make me special. That without my parents' money and connections, I'm nothing. Nobody. Her voice broke on a sob. And you, she continued, you're genuinely brilliant. Talented in a way I'll never be. You did all of this yourself. Taught yourself. Built yourself into this incredible person with no help, no resources, no safety net. And I couldn't handle it. Couldn't handle seeing someone succeed without all the privileges I'd always taken for granted. Shennels was fully crying now, body shaking with the force of her sobs. So I tried to make you small, she said. Tried to hurt you. Tried to put you in what I thought was your place. Because if I could make you feel worthless, maybe I wouldn't have to confront how worthless I actually am without all my advantages. She had to stop, had to catch her breath, had to wipe her face with her sleeve. You should hate me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You have every right to hate me. You should have walked away in that cargo area. Should have left me sitting in the wreckage of my robot and my arrogance and my privilege. Should have let me fail. Let me experience consequences for the first time in my life. She looked at Elma with an expression of complete bewilderment. But you helped me anyway, she said. You spent the entire night rebuilding my robot. Teaching me. Being patient with me when I didn't deserve your patience. Showing me grace I've never earned. What? Why would you do that? The silence that followed was heavy. Loaded with 24 hours of tension and pain and unexpected connection. Elma took a long breath before answering. Because someone helped me once, she said quietly. When my parents died, when I was 7 years old and my whole world had been destroyed, everyone said my grandmother was too old to raise me. Too poor. Didn't have the resources. Said I'd be better off in foster care with a younger family with people who could provide more. She stared at her hands as she spoke. But my grandmother Eunice fought for me anyway, she continued. Fought the social workers, the courts, the system. She was 72 years old, living on a fixed income, but she took me in. Raised me. Loved me. Elma's voice got softer, more tender. And she taught me something important, she said. She told me, we rise by lifting others. Even when they don't deserve it. Especially when they don't deserve it. Because that's what separates good people from everyone else. Good people choose compassion even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She finally looked at Shennels. I helped you because that's who I choose to be, Elma said firmly. Not because of who you are or what you did. But because of who I am. Because of who my grandmother raised me to be. She paused, making sure Shennels was really hearing this. My identity, my worth, my character isn't determined by how other people treat me, Elma said. It's determined by how I choose to respond. You call me that horrible name. You tried to make me feel less than human. But I don't have to become less than human in response. I can choose to be exactly who I want to be. Shennels was listening with an intensity that was almost painful, absorbing every word like she was hearing a foreign language for the first time. I choose compassion, Elma continued. I choose to help. I choose to teach. Not because you earned it, but because that's the person I want to be in the world. That's my grandmother's legacy. That's my parents' legacy. And no one, not even you at your worst, can take that choice away from me. The words landed in the space between them like something physical, something Shennels could almost reach out and touch. I don't deserve your kindness, Shennels said, her voice barely audible. No, Elma agreed, unflinchingly honest. You don't. The blunt truth of it made Shennels flinch. But maybe you'll pay it forward someday, Elma continued, her voice softening slightly. Maybe someday someone will hurt you or wrong you or try to make you feel small. And in that moment you'll remember this night. You'll remember that someone showed you grace when you didn't deserve it. And maybe you'll choose to do the same for someone else. Maybe that's enough. Shennels sobbed, the sound raw and broken. I'm so sorry, she said, the words coming out in gasps between sobs. I'm so sorry. For what I said. For what I thought. For how I treated you. For everything my privilege has blinded me to my entire life. For being the kind of person who could look at another human being and say something so cruel, so dehumanizing, so unforgivably racist. She was shaking now, her whole body trembling with the force of her emotion. I'm sorry for being exactly the kind of person my parents raised me to be, she continued. For never questioning it. For accepting their worldview without ever examining whether it was right or true or decent. For hurting you when you'd done nothing wrong except exist in a space I thought belonged only to people like me. Elma reached out and put a hand on Shennels' shoulder. The contact made Shennels cry harder. I accept your apology, Elma said clearly. Shennels looked up, shocked. But Shennels, listen to me, Elma continued, her voice taking on a firmer tone. Saying sorry isn't enough. It's a start, but it's not enough. You have to be different now. Actually different. In how you think, how you speak, how you treat people. In what you accept from your parents and your social circle. In what you tolerate and what you challenge. She squeezed Shennels' shoulder once before letting go. You can't just feel bad about what you did and then go back to your life unchanged, Elma said. That's not growth. That's just guilt. Real change means you have to actively work to be better. Every single day. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it costs you something. Shennels nodded, wiping her face. I will, she said, her voice hoarse from crying but filled with conviction. I promise you I will. I'll do better. Be better. I'll question everything I was taught. I'll challenge my parents when they say things like they did. I'll use my privilege to lift people up instead of putting them down. Good, Elma said. They sat together in the early morning light, shoulder to shoulder against the wall. Not quite friends yet. The hurt was too recent, the wound too fresh for that. But something had shifted. Something fundamental had changed in both of them. Shennels had been broken open, forced to confront the ugliness she'd been carrying her whole life without even recognizing it as ugly. And Elma had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed. The strength to choose grace over vengeance. The strength to see humanity even in someone who tried to strip her of her own. Outside, Geneva was waking up. The competition would begin in just over 24 hours. They needed to sleep, to prepare, to get ready for the presentations that would determine their futures. But for now they just sat. Two 14-year-old girls who'd been on opposite sides of a divide they'd been born into, finding their way to something that looked like understanding. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust would have to be rebuilt gradually. Shennels would have to prove through actions, not just words, that she'd truly changed. And Elma would have to navigate the complicated territory of forgiving someone who'd hurt her so deeply. But in that moment, sitting on a workshop floor as the sun rose over the Alps, it felt like maybe, just maybe, they'd both found something they didn't know they were looking for. A chance to be better than they were. A chance to build something new from broken pieces. A chance to choose who they wanted to be instead of accepting who they'd been told they should be. And sometimes that's exactly what grace looks like. Not perfection. Not immediate healing. Just two people choosing to be human together, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. If this story is touching you, if you believe in the power of second chances and the strength it takes to forgive, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Because these two girls are about to step onto a stage in front of hundreds of people, and what happens next will determine not just who wins a competition, but who they become as people. The Geneva Youth Robotics Summit Auditorium was breathtaking. A massive space with tiered seating that rose up like an amphitheater, state-of-the-art lighting and projection systems, and a stage that seemed to stretch endlessly under the bright spots. The kind of venue that made you feel simultaneously tiny and important, where history was made and futures were decided. Hundreds of students filled the seats. Competitors, teammates, coaches. In the back rows sat parents who'd flown in from around the world. In the front section, the judges. University professors, industry professionals, MIT admissions scouts taking notes on tablets. Representatives from tech companies looking for the next generation of talent. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. Elma Richardson stood backstage, waiting for her name to be called. She was fourth in the presentation order, which meant she'd had to sit through 3 other presentations while her anxiety built to almost unbearable levels. Her robot sat on a small cart next to her, looking humble compared to some of the other projects she'd seen. No flashy LED displays, no chrome finishes, no impressive size. Just a functional, practical water filtration system built in a garage in Detroit. She thought about her grandmother Eunice watching the live stream back home. Thought about Mrs. TJ somewhere in the audience. Thought about the girl who'd called her a slur less than 48 hours ago, who was somewhere in this building preparing for her own presentation. So much had happened. So much had changed. The presenter before her finished to polite applause. A complex drone system with autonomous navigation. Impressive but cold. Technical excellence without heart. Then she heard her name. Next, we have Elma Richardson from Detroit, Michigan, presenting a solar-powered water filtration system designed for communities without access to clean water. Elma took a deep breath, grabbed her robot cart and walked onto that enormous stage. The lights were blinding. The audience was a dark sea of faces she couldn't quite make out. The judges sat at a long table directly in front of the stage, expressions neutral, pens ready. She set up her demonstration area with shaking hands. Poured contaminated water into one container. Positioned her robot. Connected the display monitor so everyone could see the readings. Then she began. "My name is Elma Richardson," she said, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. She cleared her throat, tried again. "I'm 14 years old and I built this robot in my grandmother's garage in Detroit." She activated the system. The solar panel began charging the battery, the display showing energy conversion in real time. The filtration mechanism hummed to life. "This is a solar-powered water filtration robot designed for communities that don't have access to clean drinking water," she continued, her voice getting stronger. "It can purify up to 50 gallons of water per day, removing bacteria, parasites, and chemical contaminants. The entire system costs less than $200 to manufacture using recycled and salvaged materials." She started the filtration process. Contaminated water flowed into the system, passed through multiple filtration stages and emerged clean. The monitor showed bacterial counts dropping from dangerous levels to 0. Chemical markers disappearing. pH levels normalizing. The judges leaned forward, watching intently. "The solar panel provides all necessary power," Elma explained, pointing to the display. "In areas without reliable electricity, this makes the system completely independent. The filtration membranes can be replaced with locally sourced materials. The design is open source, meaning anyone can build and modify it for their specific needs." She ran the water quality test, comparing the contaminated input to the purified output. The difference was dramatic, undeniable. One of the judges, a woman with gray hair and kind eyes, raised her hand. Ms. Richardson, this is impressive work. Can you tell us how you developed this system on what I assume was a limited budget? Elma smiled, a genuine expression of pride. Free online resources, she said. YouTube tutorials, open access scientific papers, online forums where engineers share knowledge. I built it in my grandmother's garage using tools borrowed from neighbors. When I couldn't afford new parts, I salvaged components from old electronics. Broken laptops, discarded water heaters, anything I could find. She gestured to her robot with obvious affection. The constraint actually made me more creative, she said. I had to find solutions that didn't depend on expensive materials. Had to design systems that could be built anywhere by anyone with minimal resources. Because that's who this robot is for. Not people with access to university labs and unlimited budgets. People who need clean water and can't afford commercial filtration systems. Her voice was passionate now, the nervousness burned away by genuine belief in her work. I think the best innovations come from necessity, not abundance, she said. When you have everything, you can afford to be wasteful, inefficient, overcomplicated. But when you have nothing, every choice matters. Every component has to earn its place. That's where real innovation happens. Another judge, a younger man with an Indian accent, spoke up. What inspired this particular project? Why water filtration? Elma's expression softened. My grandmother Eunice grew up in rural Alabama in the 1950s, she said. She told me stories about her childhood, about communities where clean water wasn't guaranteed, about kids getting sick from drinking from contaminated wells because they didn't have any other choice, about watching neighbors suffer from preventable waterborne diseases. She looked out at the audience, even though she couldn't see individual faces past the stage lights. Technology should serve people who need it most, she said firmly. Not just people who can afford it. Not just people in wealthy countries or expensive cities. Everyone. My grandmother taught me that we rise by lifting others. This robot is my way of lifting. Of using what I've learned to solve real problems for real people. She paused, then added quietly, my parents died when I was 7. My grandmother raised me alone on a fixed income with more love than resources. Everything good in me came from her. This robot is my way of honoring that. Of making sure her stories, her experiences, her love, they matter. They create change. The silence that followed was profound. Then someone in the audience started clapping. Then another. Then the entire auditorium erupted. Not the polite applause the other presenters had received. A standing ovation. Hundreds of people on their feet, applauding not just the robot but the heart behind it. The story. The purpose. Elma stood on that stage, tears streaming down her face, unable to believe this was happening. In the audience, Shennels Vandermeer was clapping harder than anyone. Jumping up and down, tears of pride running down her own face, screaming her support like Elma was a rock star instead of a 14-year-old girl from Detroit. The judges were all standing too, nodding to each other with the kind of expressions that suggested they'd just witnessed something special. Elma took a bow, carefully packed up her robot, and walked off stage on legs that felt like they might give out any second. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. 3 more presenters went. All talented, all impressive. Then there was a brief intermission while the judges deliberated. Then Shennels' name was called. Shennels Vandermeer from Connecticut, presenting a manually controlled surgical assistance robot. Shennels walked onto that same stage carrying her rebuilt robot, and the contrast to Elma's entrance couldn't have been more stark. Where Elma had been nervous but ultimately confident in her work, Shennels looked terrified. Her hands were shaking visibly. Her face was pale. The robot she carried was clearly damaged and repaired, wires visible, mismatched components, frame bearing stress marks from being bent and straightened. It looked like exactly what it was, something rebuilt from wreckage in a desperate all-night session. She set it on the demonstration table, adjusted the microphone with trembling hands and looked out at the audience. For a long moment she just stood there, silent, gathering courage. Then she began. This robot was supposed to be an advanced AI-assisted surgical device, she said, her voice shaky but audible. Built in a university laboratory with the best equipment money could buy. Programmed with cutting-edge machine learning algorithms. Designed to perform autonomous microsurgery with precision no human hand could match. She gestured to the obviously damaged robot. 48 hours ago, during a turbulence incident on the flight here, it was completely destroyed in the cargo hold. Main processor shattered. AI core corrupted beyond recovery. 6 months of work reduced to wreckage. She took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was stronger. But this presentation isn't actually about the robot, she said. It's about what I learned when everything was taken away from me. The judges exchanged glances, intrigued now. I've won robotics competitions before, Shennels continued. 2 national championships. Trophies on my shelf at home. Articles written about the brilliant Vandermeer legacy continuing. But I never actually built anything with my own hands until 2 nights ago. She looked down at the rebuilt robot, and her expression was complex. Shame and pride mixed together. This robot nearly became nothing, she said. Just a pile of broken parts, an insurance claim, a disappointing story to tell at dinner parties. Just like I almost became nothing when my privilege was stripped away and I had to face my own inadequacy. Her voice was getting more confident now, finding its rhythm. My entire life I've had access to resources most people can't imagine, she said, unflinchingly honest. University labs. Professional consultants. The newest equipment. Unlimited budgets. I thought that made me special. Made me better. Made me deserving of success. She paused, and her eyes found Elma in the front row where competitors sat. It took someone I deeply wronged to show me what true innovation actually looks like, Shennels said, her voice thick with emotion. Resourcefulness born from necessity. Brilliance that comes from genuine passion instead of parental pressure. Creativity that emerges from constraints rather than abundance. She broke eye contact with Elma, looked back at the judges. This robot represents a second chance I didn't earn, she said clearly. Given to me by someone with more grace, more compassion, more genuine human decency than I deserved. Someone who chose kindness when I had chosen cruelty. Who chose to teach when I had tried to humiliate. Who saw humanity in me even after I'd tried to strip her of her own. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Shennels activated the robot. The manual control interface came to life. She demonstrated the surgical arm, showing how it responded to her commands. Reaching, grasping, rotating with impressive precision despite its rough appearance. This isn't the best robot in this competition, she said as it moved. It's not the most advanced or the most polished or the most technically impressive. But it's the first thing I've ever built that actually means something to me. The arm completed a complex series of movements, each one executed perfectly. Because I built this with my own hands, Shennels continued. I wrote every line of control code. I calibrated every servo. I solved every problem. Not because I had the best resources, but because someone believed I could do it even when I didn't believe in myself. She powered down the robot, faced the judges directly. This robot taught me that my worth isn't in winning, she said, her voice clear and strong. It's not in trophies or prestige or MIT acceptance letters or maintaining my family's reputation. My worth is in how I treat people. In whether I use my privilege to lift others up or put them down. In whether I choose to be better than I was raised to be. She took a breath. I came to this competition thinking it would define my future, she said. And it has. Just not in the way I expected. Because the future I want now isn't about being superior to others. It's about being worthy of second chances. About earning the grace I was given. About becoming someone my future children can be proud of instead of ashamed of. She bowed slightly to the judges. Thank you for your time, she said. The applause that followed wasn't as thunderous as Elma's had been. But it was genuine. Appreciative. The judges were nodding, clearly moved by the honesty, the vulnerability, the growth they'd just witnessed. Shennels walked off stage, legs shaking, feeling like she'd just confessed her sins to the entire world. But also feeling lighter than she had in years. The remaining presentations concluded. The judges deliberated for what felt like an eternity but was actually only 30 minutes. Then came the awards ceremony. The entire auditorium reconvened. All the presenters sat in a special section at the front. Parents and supporters filled the rest of the seats. The energy was electric, anticipatory. The head judge, a distinguished professor from MIT, took the stage with envelopes containing the results. Before we announce the winners, he said, I want to acknowledge the exceptional quality of work we've seen today. Every student here represents the future of innovation, engineering, and human-centered design. You should all be proud. He opened the first envelope. Third place goes to Marcus Chin from Singapore, for his autonomous environmental monitoring drone system. Polite applause. Marcus, a boy who looked about 16, walked onto stage to accept his trophy and certificate. The professor opened the second envelope. Second place, he said and paused for effect. Goes to Shennels Vandermeer from Connecticut, for her manually controlled surgical assistance robot. Shennels' face went through about 5 different expressions in 2 seconds. Disbelief. confusion, then overwhelming gratitude. She genuinely thought she wouldn't place at all. Thought the judges would see her destroyed and rebuilt robot as a failure. But they'd seen something else. They'd seen growth. Honesty. The courage to admit inadequacy and learn from it. She stood on shaky legs and walked to the stage. Accepted the second-place trophy, which suddenly felt like the most valuable thing she'd ever held. Not because it was prestigious but because she'd actually earned it. She looked out at the audience, found Elma, and mouthed "thank you," with tears streaming down her face. Elma smiled back, genuinely happy for her. The professor opened the final envelope, though by now everyone in the room knew what it would say. And first place, with a unanimous decision from all judges, goes to Elma Richardson from Detroit, Michigan for her solar-powered water filtration system designed for underserved communities. The auditorium exploded. People were on their feet instantly, cheering, applauding, some even crying. The MIT scouts were nodding approvingly, already making notes. University representatives were pulling out business cards. This was the kind of student everyone wanted. Elma walked to the stage in a daze. She accepted the first-place trophy, significantly larger than Shennels' second-place version, and held it up with trembling hands. She looked out at the audience, found the section where livestream cameras were set up, and knew her grandmother was watching from Detroit. Watching her baby girl stand on a stage in Geneva, Switzerland, holding a trophy that represented years of work, sacrifice, determination, and love. Tears poured down Elma's face. Happy tears. Overwhelmed tears. Grateful tears. And in the audience, Shennels Vandermeer was clapping harder than anyone else in the entire room. Jumping up and down like a little kid, her second-place trophy abandoned on her seat, screaming her joy for Elma's success. Not a trace of jealousy. Not a hint of resentment. Just genuine, pure happiness for someone who deserved this moment. The ceremony concluded. Photos were taken. Judges congratulated winners. Parents swarmed their children. Media interviewed top finishers. Eventually the crowd dispersed. Students headed back to hotels or went to celebrate. The auditorium slowly emptied. The sun was setting over Geneva, painting the Alps in shades of gold and pink and purple. The kind of sunset that made you believe in beauty and possibility. Outside the competition venue, Elma was carefully packing her robot into its case, preparing for the journey home. Her first-place trophy sat next to her, catching the sunset light. She heard footsteps approaching and looked up. Shennels stood there, second-place trophy in hand, looking nervous and hopeful and genuine. "Hey," Shennels said softly. "Congratulations. You absolutely deserved first place. Your robot is going to change lives." Elma smiled, a warm, real smile. "Thanks," she said. "You did really good too. Second place is impressive, especially after everything." "Only because of you," Shennels said immediately. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the last 48 hours hanging between them. Then Shennels took a breath. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure," Elma replied. Shennels seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "Can we stay in touch?" she asked, her voice vulnerable. "Not because I need help with robotics or because I owe you or anything transactional like that, but because I'd like to know you. Actually know you. As a friend. If you'll let me." Elma studied Shennels' face. Looked for any sign of insincerity, any hint that this was about assuaging guilt or checking a box. But all she saw was honest hope. A 14-year-old girl who'd been broken open and wanted to build herself into something better. "Yeah," Elma said finally. "We can do that. But I need you to know something." "Okay," Shennels said. "I'm going to call you out if you mess up," Elma said firmly. "If I see you falling back into old patterns, treating people poorly, letting your privilege blind you to other people's humanity. I'm not going to be a silent friend who lets things slide. Understand?" Shennels actually smiled through the tears that were forming. "I hope you do," she said. "I need that. I need someone in my life who won't let me slide back. Who'll hold me accountable. Who'll remind me of who I want to be when I forget." They pulled out their phones and exchanged numbers. Such a simple act, but it felt significant. A bridge being built between two worlds that had been separated by privilege and prejudice. Then, awkward but genuine, they hugged. A real hug, not the performative kind. The kind that meant something. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "I meant what I said on that stage," Shennels said, wiping her eyes. "I'm going to be better. Different. I'm going to be someone my future kids can be proud of, not ashamed of. Someone who uses privilege to lift people up instead of keeping them down." "I believe you," Elma said. And when you slip up, because we're human and we all slip up sometimes, you'll get back up and try again. That's all any of us can do. Shennels laughed, a surprised sound. When did you get so wise? She asked. My grandmother, Elma said simply. Everything good in me came from her. Every lesson about compassion, about dignity, about choosing who you want to be instead of accepting who the world tells you to be. All her. They stood together watching the sunset paint the Alps in impossible colors. I'm going to tell my parents the truth, Shennels said suddenly. About what I said on the plane. About what you did. About how my privilege has been blinding me. They're not going to like it. They're going to be angry, probably disappointed, maybe even try to dismiss it or minimize it. She looked at Elma with determination. But I don't care anymore, she continued. I'm done living my life for their approval. Done maintaining their standards and their prejudices. If they can't accept that I need to change to be better, then that's their problem, not mine. That takes courage, Elma said quietly. I learned from the best, Shennels replied. They stood in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, just existing together as the day faded into evening. Finally it was time to part ways. Shennels had to meet her father who'd flown in for the finals. Elma had to call her grandmother and share the news of her victory. Before they separated, Shennels turned back one more time. Elma, she said. Yeah. Thank you, Shennels said, her voice thick with emotion. For seeing past the worst of me. For showing me what I could be instead of what I was. For giving me a second chance I didn't deserve but desperately needed. Elma smiled, the kind of smile that held understanding and hope and cautious optimism. You're welcome, she said. Now go be that better person. Actually be her. Not just in words but in actions. Every single day. I will, Shennels promised. I swear to you I will. They waved goodbye, each heading in different directions. Shennels toward the hotel where her father was waiting. Elma toward the airport shuttle that would take her back to Detroit, back to her grandmother, back to the garage where she'd built her future with nothing but determination and salvaged parts. But they weren't the same people who'd boarded Flight 447 just 2 days ago. Shennels was no longer the arrogant, privileged girl who thought superiority was her birthright. She was someone who'd been broken open and was actively choosing to rebuild herself into something better. Someone who understood that privilege was a responsibility, not a trophy. Someone who would spend the rest of her life trying to earn the grace she'd been given. And Elma was no longer just the brilliant underdog fighting for recognition. She was someone who'd discovered that her greatest strength wasn't in her technical skills or her resourcefulness. It was in her capacity for compassion. For choosing grace when vengeance would have been justified. For seeing humanity in someone who'd tried to strip her of her own. As the sun finally set over Geneva and the Alps faded to silhouettes against the darkening sky, the narrator's voice echoed one final time. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most become the mirrors we need to see ourselves clearly. When hate crashed at 30,000 feet, what rose from the wreckage wasn't just broken robots and forced apologies and second-place trophies. It was two girls who learned that strength isn't about being superior to others. It's not about winning competitions or maintaining legacies or proving you're better than someone else. Real strength is about being brave enough to change. To admit when you're wrong. To accept that you've been blind to your own privilege and prejudice. To do the hard, uncomfortable work of becoming better. Real strength is about being brave enough to forgive. To show grace to people who don't deserve it. To choose compassion over vengeance even when the hurt is fresh and raw and completely justified. Real strength is about being brave enough to become who you were meant to be instead of who the world tried to make you. Because in the end, we're all building something. Every choice we make, every word we speak, every action we take, we're building the person we're becoming. The only question that really matters is this: what kind of person are we building ourselves into? Are we building someone who uses privilege to exclude and diminish? Or someone who uses it to lift and include? Are we building someone who holds on to hurt and nurses grievances? Or someone who chooses healing and extends grace? Are we building someone who accepts the limitations and prejudices we were taught? Or someone who questions them, challenges them, grows beyond them? Elma and Shennels answered that question. In a cargo hold in Geneva. In a workshop at 3 a.m. On a stage in front of hundreds of people. They chose who they wanted to be. And in doing so they gave each other the greatest gift two people can share. The gift of transformation. The gift of second chances. The gift of becoming. If this story moved you, if you believe that people can change and that grace is stronger than hate, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this matter. Stories about ordinary people choosing to be extraordinary. Stories about hate being transformed into hope. Stories about two girls who could have been enemies becoming the exact thing each other needed. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been given a second chance you didn't deserve? Or have you been the one who extended grace when you had every right to walk away? Your story matters. Share it below. Because maybe, just maybe, your story will inspire someone else to choose compassion over cruelty. To build bridges instead of walls. To become who they were meant to be. Just like Elma and Shennels did 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, when hate crashed and grace rose from the wreckage.